This is our next stop on the Christian calendar. Today, we're going to look at Good Friday. And Abby Olcese, she's going to join us and help connect the dots between Good Friday and Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Good Friday is that day that we stop and we recognize the death of Jesus on the cross. We look at his crucifixion and all that that means for us. So I want to encourage you to sit down and enjoy this episode of the Live Faith First podcast. When you read a book or watch a movie, do you ever skip to the end to find out what happens before reading the whole story? Now, I try not to do this, but when I was a kid, I can't tell you how many times I read the last few pages just to make sure the hero survived. Like I had to know. Well, today we're going to be talking about Good Friday. And the thing is this is kind of one of those days that's a bit anticlimactic because we know the end of the story. So what we're going to try to do today is we're going to try to stay on Good Friday. We're going to do our best because Easter's exciting. Easter's the answer. But Good Friday, when we go through it, it's not like it was for, say, Jesus' followers, who that weekend must have been an atrociously terrible, dreams being killed weekend. So in order to go through all of this, we brought back Abby Olcese. So Abby, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Yes. And she's our movie critic. She's our author. She's our friend of the podcast. I don't get to say that too often because you're really one of our few repeats. So thanks for being here. This is awesome.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to talk about, give me the movies today. What movies are we talking about today? Our movie.
We are talking about Rogue One, a Star Wars story,
Yes.
which if there is a Good Friday story within the Star Wars universe, it is this one for me.
It has to be. It has to be. Now, every time I sit down to watch this movie, and I know I've said this on every podcast that I ever talk about Star Wars, I love Star Wars and I watch the movies on the regular. So like I'll go back, I'll just watch them. So Rogue One, I love the movie. My wife, she almost always refuses to watch it with me because she cannot stand the end. Like even this time on Friday night, she's like, I know we got to watch the movie, so let's watch it. 45 minutes, which is right before they start heading to Scarif. He's like, I'm kind of tired. I'm going to go to bed. I'm like, she's like, I know what happened. And she's seen it. So it's not that she's avoided it her entire life, but great story. Super fun. We're going to geek out on that today. But before we get to the movie, Good Friday. Would you break Good Friday down as if this is somebody who's listening, who has never heard the word Good Friday, has no idea what that means in the Christian tradition. So tell us what Good Friday is.
For sure. So Good Friday is part of what's called Holy Week that, depending on the tradition, it can include basically the entire week. Most mainline Protestant churches will observe Maundy Thursday, which is kind of about the Last Supper. Some churches like to kind of co-observe it with Passover and to host a Passover dinner to kind of recreate the experience of Jesus and the disciples at the Last Supper, their last kind of gathering together before Jesus is arrested. Good Friday is kind of about the arrest and the trial of Jesus leading up to the crucifixion. And so this is where most of the drama resides. You get everything from Jesus's arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane to Peter's betrayal of Jesus, where Jesus tells Peter that before the rooster crows, you will have betrayed me 3 times. And Peter, who is sort of the audience surrogate for most of us, I'm sorry, I'm using movie terms. This is how I operate. He says, I will never do that. I would never do that to you, Lord. And of course he does without realizing it until the rooster crows 3 times and he realizes, oh, wait, I have betrayed my Lord and Savior and I have to live with that shame, basically. This is also where Judas, who betrays Christ to his arresters, commits suicide over his guilt. This is basically everything leading up to the crucifixion. So there is a lot. There is kind of the experience of Jesus before Pilate, and kind of reaffirming his identity as the Savior. There's the people of Jerusalem calling for his death just days after they welcomed him into Jerusalem on what we call Palm Sunday, where they bring him in on a donkey and they rejoice at his arrival. So it's a really big, dramatic kind of changing of fates, and all leading up to the the crucifixion of Jesus, which some churches will discuss that on Good Friday. Other churches will observe it on what we call Holy Saturday or the Easter Vigil. If you go to at least an Episcopal church, it's a really dramatic service where one by one the lights all go out and you're just left in there in the darkness. And the lights do not come back until Easter Sunday. So it can be a lot of really interesting pageantry around it too. That I think it's as somebody who's kind of a liturgy nerd, I find it really fascinating. So yeah, there's a lot going on Good Friday, and it's also, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it's a real bummer. As you mentioned, your wife doesn't love the part of Rogue One where the heroes get to Scarif, where things, ultimately go well but awry. And this is that part of the gospel narrative. The thing that to me makes it so interesting is that like we are, as people who are ultimately familiar with the shape of the gospel narrative and know that Easter is coming, we know that things are going to be okay. But for the moment, we have to intentionally kind of sit in this sort of liminal space of not knowing with the disciples who, at the time that story happened, did not know that everything was going to be okay. Everything looked really scary, both for their teacher and friend who they loved and also for their own lives. So there's a lot of kind of open questions. Again, one of the best things about Lent is it's open questioning. And there's a lot of uncertainty that is kind of counteracted with this kind of knowledge that everything is going to be okay, even though right now it looks bleak.
Yeah. No, that. Thank you for that explanation. That was great. That was. I hope
it wasn't too thorough.
So, well, there's a lot. Like, I mean, you can just look at the number of words spent leading up. Even from in the Gospels, in the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the words that are used from, say, triumphal entry through his crucifixion are way more, and I don't have the numbers, than like it always seems anticlimactic. Because what in Mark? Like, you don't get anything other than his resurrection, and then it's just over. You're like,
you also don't get that. There's a lot that Mark skips. Mark is pretty spare.
He is pretty spare. So I'm picking on the worst one. Don't get me wrong. And then of course Luke just goes writes a whole nother book. He's like, there's more to say, so I'm just going to write a whole nother book here. Luke is probably the most verbose, or I don't know whatever word says. He writes a lot of words.
Yeah, you get to John, and it's like legitimately like a novel. Like it's really good reading. I think it's my favorite. I think it's the narrative for Holy Week that gets used the most in churches for a reason. I think it's the one that's the most descriptive and dramatic.
Yeah. And okay, nope, I'm not going there because I would be skipping ahead, and I'm not going to skip ahead today. So to kind of just bring the tension to this one more time before we kind of step into the movie and some other things that happen on Good Friday, but just to try to put our feet in the disciples' shoes, but there were thousands of people. There were people that were cheering for Jesus a matter of days before he gets crucified. And sure, some of them turned on him, but others thought that he was the one. Like he was the one who was going to save the world. He was the one that was going to be their bring freedom for them. Now, they were thinking politically, but no matter what, they looked to Jesus as the answer. They gave their allegiance, their finances, everything, right? And with a matter of a few hours, I mean, he's arrested in the middle of the night. He goes to 2 trials, and he's killed and pulled off the cross before the sun goes down again. So, within less than 24 hours, he goes from having a meal with his disciples to that night when it's dark again, they're all alone. And that just has, like, if I try to put myself there, how excruciating that weekend must have been. How excruciating. And even so on Sunday morning, it looks like they're together. Like, I mean, right? So it says like the women go out and they come back to where the disciples are. Like there's this, it doesn't say, but like it seems like they might be in the same place. So they're at least hanging out, or at least the women know where the disciples are.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to kind of put myself in those 48, I know it's supposed to be 3 days. And for all you out there, you can't count because some monk like 1500 years ago got all the days wrong. So it's not actually Good Friday. It's probably like Good Wednesday, but we don't
Yeah.
start celebrating it till Friday. But anyway, let's not get into that detail. But over the weekend, when they're sitting there, can you imagine being Peter and the shame and the
Yeah.
guilt and the anger and the anxiety and the what ifs and the planning? Like, oh, well, let's just keep, Jesus would have wanted us to do something. And like, and all, maybe even going through all of the stages of mourning and sad. Like, anyway, again, I'm just trying to put myself in their shoes because
Yeah.
in those shoes, this is a terrible day. We call it Good Friday, which again, I'm not sure why we call Jesus is getting crucified good, other than we know what happens on Sunday.
Right.
But it's kind of Dark Friday. It's Black
Yeah.
Friday. It's which of course it's after
Yeah.
Thanksgiving, so we don't get that one. But anyway, all right. With all of that, let's talk about the movie a little bit, and then we're going to kind of go back and forth. But give us a
Good. Yeah.
lowdown on Rogue One. What is Rogue One? Walk us through that movie a little bit.
Yeah. So Rogue One came out in, I want to say 2016, and is part of like the newer series of Star Wars movies that came out following The Force Awakens. And so it is a prequel to A New Hope. Which, as you know, A New Hope focuses on kind of finding these Death Star plans that have been hidden and kind of kept by Princess Leia. They are the reason that she gets kidnapped at the beginning of that movie. And so this is the story about the people who went on the mission to steal the Death Star plans in the first place, how they discovered the flaw in the plan that is what allows Luke Skywalker to blow it up. And in some ways, I could see how people might be annoyed that it is an entire movie that explains one very small bit of plot in A New Hope. But I think what's interesting about this movie is that without this story, the rest of the Star Wars series, as we know it, technically does not exist. Like this is the reason that all of those other narratives are allowed to be. So that's, I think, a good way to go into it, thinking about this. And it follows the rebels who steal the plans, but they all kind of come from disparate backgrounds. One of the main characters, Jyn Erso, is the daughter of basically the architect of Death Star, Galen Erso, who was kind of coerced into building it. And she spends most of her life on the run because her father is kind of recaptured by the Empire to finish off the plans. Her mother is killed, and she goes to stay with a friend of the family who's also kind of a dangerous rebel in his own right. He's so intense that even the rest of the rebellion wants nothing to do with him. And that kind of, as an adult, she's kind of a loner. She doesn't really trust anybody, and she's kind of out for herself. There's also Cassian Andor, who is he's a rebel captain. He's a spy, and has been doing that for most of his life. And you can tell that he feels kind of jaded and morally compromised by all the stuff that he's had to do.
Wait a second. We're doing 2 podcasts back to back with Oscar Isaac's in it, right?
Isn't because Annihilation, but he's no. This is Diego Luna, so not Oscar Isaac. Yeah, that's okay.
Sorry, dang it. Is Oscar Isaac in the Star Wars universe yet?
Yeah, not until the Force Awakens trilogy. So yeah, yeah.
He joins us.
He's a distant glimmer in the eye of somebody.
He's a few generations away. Okay, my bad. I apologize.
You're good.
I'm going to leave that in there, but please, I just all of a sudden got excited. But no, you're right. It's Diego Luna.
Lent is a season of humility, so okay.
Yes, and realizing we make mistakes, don't get it right all the time. We can admit it without too much shame. I'm sweating a little bit, but that'll go away quickly.
You're fine. Yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah, we meet Cassian in the middle of a mission where he ends up having to kill a fellow spy because that spy has been physically compromised, and you can kind of see on his face that this is not the first time he's had to do this, and it kind of weighs a little heavier on him each time. There is Bodhi Rook, who is a kind of defected Imperial pilot who has the plans from Galen that he's trying to bring to a man named Saw Gerrera, who is Jin's kind of surrogate father. And he's also like he's been working for the Empire basically his whole life. He doesn't want to do that anymore, and so he's kind of morally compromised in that area. He has been morally compromised most of his life and doesn't want to be anymore. And finally, there is K2SO, who is this giant Imperial droid who's been kind of reconfigured by Cassian to work for the rebellion. And K2 himself has kind of his own sort of crisis of identity, basically, because he is in the body of an enemy, but he wants to be thought of as good and helpful, and it's made him kind of bitter and sarcastic. And along the way, we meet a couple of other folks. We meet two people who were guardians of the Jedi Temple that has now been destroyed and are kind of priests without a church, so to say. And they kind of end up joining the quest because they know it's the right thing to do. So it's a very kind of complex setup, but once we get going, all of the characters kind of coalesce around the need to get these plans and to transmit them to Princess Leia so that she can kind of mastermind the downfall of the Death Star and the plot of basically of A New Hope. And along the way, they kind of bond and they find new meaning in their lives, but it all kind of costs them their own lives. It comes at the sacrifice of themselves.
Yeah, at the hands of the Death Star, actually.
At the hands of the Death Star. So yeah, these are characters whose names, like, I mean, Cassian Andor gets his own series later on, but those are the moments leading up to Rogue One. Those are like, it's beyond this point. These characters don't exist. They die. Yes. They are gone. But their sacrifice is what enables the rest of the story, which I think is kind of where it ties into Good Friday. That without that action, we don't get anything else.
Yeah. And that last scene where, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it yet, it's been out long enough. So anyway, that there is the ultimate sacrifice that's made for hope, right? Mm-hmm. That for good, like it was, their sacrifice didn't go to waste, of course, which we find out as we move further through the trilogy. Mm-hmm. But I want to talk about a couple characters before we get into some other stuff. But one, which you've already mentioned, is Chirrut Imwe. Is that how you say it? He played by Donnie Yen. Yeah. Is that it? Okay. Yes. I wrote it down. That's the only reason I could say it. I don't have that name memorized, but he's the I am the Force and the Force is with me, or I am one with the Force and the Force with me. He's that guy. Yes. So if you've seen the movie, he's the I am the one with the Force with me. And he is the calming force in the movie. And I loved how you brought out that he was also probably the most, he seemed like the most spiritual of everybody there. Everybody there, they have their own backstory. And if spirituality had been part of their story, it was no longer too effective or too strong in their present. So, and ironically, he's the only one that is blind, but he seems to be able to see everything that's going on around him and with people. So, would you talk a little bit about his character? Just kind of that he's kind of the comic relief to some degree. But he's also the baddest warrior we have in the show. So talk a little bit about that character.
Because he's Donnie Yen. He can't not be. But
right?
Yeah. So his character, Chirrut Imwe, is kind of paired with another former guardian of the Jedi Temple named Baze Malbus. And they're best friends. They've kind of been partners for forever, basically, for as long as they've known each other. And they are kind of like a Grumpy and Sunshine combo, sort of.
Yes.
Where Chirrut has sort of he's got this faith, despite the fact that he's experienced a lot of hardships in his life and that he's blind, and he maintains his faith in kind of the Jedi way and in the Force, and it pays off. And Baze is kind of a skeptic, especially since the temple has been destroyed. I think his identity was kind of tied up in that place and in being a guardian of it. And now that it's gone, he doesn't know what to do. And so he tends to doubt a lot of stuff. So a lot of their interaction with each other is kind of bickering over whether or not everything is going to work out. But ultimately, the two of them, I think Chirrut kind of inspires Baze to work with him and to be willing to see what needs to be done and to do it, even though it's a suicide mission and it's going to require them all to sacrifice things that are important to them and ultimately their own lives. And I think it's kind of a nice little kind of balance between like a Christ figure and a disciple, if you will, where that learning process is kind of constantly going on, and it's not a constant move forward.
Yeah.
Often it's just kind of trying to keep things from going stagnant, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it totally does. It totally does. And he's just such a fun character. I just enjoy him throughout, no matter what is going on, what chaos is around him. He has that contagious calm, right? That just, okay. And even when he's doing things, you're like, why are you walking across like in the open air, getting shot at?
Yeah.
And just, just that, and that confidence. And I think as a follower in Jesus, and the Jedi are not Christian, and I'm not saying that for anybody out there who's like, no, I'm not saying that, but that is a confidence as a follower of Jesus that we get. Mm-hmm. That confidence that God is with me. That confidence that if this is my time, then it's my time. That confidence that I trust that God's going to protect me, and that I actually heard a pastor say, we're immortal until the time that God says it's time to go home. Like we can't die until God says so. Mm-hmm. And I've carried that. I'm not sure it's 100. I mean, I think it's 100% correct, but I'll go with it, at least high 90s. Like that makes a lot of sense. And so I love that character because he brought a calming effect. He was so wise. And yet there was a lightness to him. And I think sometimes we think of the spiritual figures as heavy, kind of like caught up in their head, or maybe they're a bit grumpy or whatever it is. And I don't know. It seems like a good picture to me of what a Christian could look like in the midst of the chaos of war.
And I think for a lot of those characters who are kind of living with a lot of doubt and a lot of cynicism, to have a character like Chirrut there who has experienced a lot of similar hardships to what they have, and yet maintains this kind of this sense of purpose, basically has never lost it. Yes. I think it really does rub off on them and kind of enables them to do what they do in the last section of the film.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right. We're going to switch to Jyn here for a second. Yeah. Jyn, when we meet her, she doesn't trust anybody. She is, like you said, she's a loner. She's on her own. She's actually in a prison vehicle being transported when she's picked up by the rebellion. But to watch her transformation from, the first 20 minutes of the movie to the last 20 minutes, and just to see what community did in her life. And she dealt with a lot of pain in that movie. She watched her dad die, like all these things. And yet somehow she comes to life when she finds community. And I just love that picture too. That picture that when we're together with a purpose, like somehow that gives us life. Yeah. I mean, and I think we can even say that in Cassian Andor. We could see the same thing where there was a heaviness, right? Kind of in that first half of the movie that once he broke through to the other side and then joined in with this community. And anyway, there was also a transformation in him. So anyway, I just think that, community makes a big difference for us.
Yeah, I think it really does. And I think for Jyn, there's this, I think the fear of loss, I think, is what's keeping her from having that, because she's lost every form of family that she's had up to that point of her life. And at one point, I think she tells Cassian that it's not a problem if you don't look up, meaning like if the Empire's destruction of everything around you it's not important if you don't look at the flags flying. It's just, you're just trying to get through life, and you're trying to get through every day, and that's all that matters. And I think through her experiences with all the other characters, she learns that it's not all that matters. She sees kind of the personal devastation that people face, and she knows that the Empire is responsible for all of it, and that she has the ability to help make that stop. And so I think all of that is what empowers her to ultimately have hope that some of the other characters lack at some point. And I think that transformation is really fascinating. And Cassian's too. I think he has this belief, or at least he started out with a belief that he was doing the right thing. I think interestingly, I think he's the first person that tells Jyn that rebellions are built on hope. But when he says it, it sounds like a joke. Just, haven't you heard rebellions are built on hope? Ha ha. Like, we're not, it's kind of a low point for the rebellion, and it's a low point for him as part of it. Like, has this work that I've been doing really amounted to anything? Do I actually have hope that things are going to change? Can I actually be part of that change? And I think those hopes are dwindling for him. It's really visible that they are. And their mission together, by the end of it, like, he's defying orders to enact the mission at Scarif, because he knows it's going to work. And that is something that takes a lot of confidence. It's something that takes a lot of hope, and it's also a thing that you can't do by yourself. So I think by that point, these characters have kind of formed this bond where they trust each other, and they have actually decided that they're going to form a community together, even though they know that that's really tenuous. It may not last very long, but it's meaningful in the moment, and that's the most important thing. And that's, I think, it's when you decide that you can do good with the help of other people beside you, I think that you can actually enact real change, and that's what happens.
Yeah. No, that's so good. That's so good. And just go back to what Jyn said that you brought up, but just that idea that, we do go through life sometimes just staring at our feet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's so much going on around us. Like, I don't even know what to address. Like, I don't even know what to deal with. There are so many things. And so if I just walk through life one step in front of the other, kind of not paying attention, then I'm not saying it's not happening, but it's not something that I'm going to engage with. And
right.
Yet,
it doesn't affect me, so why should I bother? Yeah.
Right. And yet when there's a community around you that gives you hope, that gives you joy, that gives you purpose, that gives you like, oh, there's something we can do. Like, and I alone probably can't, but with this group, I can.
Mm-hmm.
I want to take this circle back to the Good Friday story and talk a little bit about these disciples. And like I kind of alluded to earlier, that it seems like the disciples probably hung out and spent time together between Jesus's death and his resurrection. We don't know. There's not a lot in the Bible about it. It doesn't tell us anything about the in-between days. But it seems like, just reading through the accounts, they were probably together.
Mm-hmm.
And just again with them, that idea of community, to be together. There was this dark shadow of the Roman Empire, which was stealing hope, right? We see political oppression from Pilate and the Roman Empire. We see religious oppression from within, people they should be safe with. And then with Jesus's friend group, right? We see Judas and Peter, and we see so many things coalescing here. And on all levels in this story, the Good Friday story, we're experiencing darkness and oppression, right?
Mm-hmm.
This just pushes me towards Easter, but I don't want to stop there. I want to stop on Good Friday and say the disciples thought they'd found the answers, but now Jesus is dead.
Yeah.
Right. They thought that there was a solution to the oppression, whether it was religious internal, whether it was Roman Empire, whether it was within their own kind of group. And now that hope is dead. What I want to know is it possible for us to leave this podcast in this dark state? Like, can we do that? We look at the end of Rogue One. If we didn't know episode 4, Luke Skywalker and, Princess Leia and Han Solo were coming.
Yeah.
That'd be a terrible ending to a movie.
It would.
People do it, but it would be just like, oh, this is awful, right?
Yeah.
Like, you just wouldn't.
And it's, I think, like, one of the things that makes Good Friday so powerful is the fact that we know that there is more,
Right.
that we have knowledge that the disciples don't have. And so we can identify, and I think the way that it applies to our own lives is that, like, how many times have we been in situations where we thought we had it all figured out, and then everything was taken away? It could be a job that we really loved that we lost. It could be family who we thought were always going to be around, and either somebody passes away or a relationship breaks up. Like, just when moments where you think where you think the future is certain, and then all of a sudden it all just kind of falls away from underneath you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's important that we have stories that end in places of potential discouragement for the characters, but a larger universal sense that that's not the end.
Right.
That we also are able
Right.
to kind of keep going ourselves.
Right.
So it's, I think at the end of Rogue One, the characters die with the hope that what they did worked out and that everything's going to be okay. But they don't know. They don't know that that's what happened. They have to hope that that's what happened. And we know that it did.
Yes.
And so I think being able to leave the theater with that knowledge, and the fact that Rogue One ends with Princess Leia getting the plans, and it ends on the word hope, importantly,
Yeah.
is that's what allows us to kind of go through those moments in our lives that are really difficult, and knowing that there is hope on the other side, that that's not the end of it. We don't know what the ending's going to be, but we do know that God has something in mind for us, and it's not to stop where we are currently.
Yeah.
So that's the lesson that lies there for me. That's also the
Yeah.
reason that I find Good Friday such a powerful thing, is that, like, the disciples are easily at the lowest point in their lives, and they have to hope that something's going to be okay, that they're at least going to be able to, at the very least, survive the next few days. And also that they have each other to do that with. I think it's important that you mentioned that they're in community, that there are parts of that story where they are by themselves and they are mourning and fearful. But when the rubber meets the road, they are together, and they are praying together, and they are waiting to find out what comes next together. So there's a lot of kind of sub themes in that, but I think community is one of them. Hope is another. And always trying to think of the present moment that you are in a larger universal context, to know that this is just one part of the story. It is not the story itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that absolutely does. And I think I have to leave it there. You just tied that up. That was beautiful. Like you brought so many of those pieces together. And I do think, I mean, isn't that what gets us through the dark days?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what is so compelling about Good Friday, is that if we thought Good Friday was the end, there's plenty of tragic ends in history. There's plenty of tragic ends, and they haven't turned into what Jesus is and what he's done for eternity, really. I mean, all of creation and all of eternity. And it's because there is a Good Friday where we acknowledge, I don't know if celebrate's the right word. We recognize that Jesus was murdered, that he was crucified. But we wouldn't be doing it the same way if we thought that was the actual end, without hope.
Exactly.
But the sun is going to rise on Sunday morning, and there's a whole different reality and world that just takes place after that. So I guess I did have something to say after what you said. I just tried to, tie together what you tied together.
I think it's great. Yeah, you got it.
This is good. So Abby, thank you once again for your time. Great movie. Good Friday, folks. If this is not something you've celebrated before or something you recognized before, find a church in your community. There will be a Good Friday service. Sometimes it's later in the day. Sometimes it's in the middle of the day. It is usually a dark and moody service. And so if that's your vibe, then you probably really, really, really like that. But if you go to Good Friday, you probably should go to Sunday morning too, because that is the actual climax of what's taken place. We think it's ending on Friday, but it's not just yet. So, all right, Abby, do you have anything to add before we close this one up?
I don't think so. I think that's a great place to stop.
All right, we'll end it there. So, Abby, thanks for being with us. We'll see you shortly as we go through Easter here in a couple of days. And for everybody out there, let's go live faith first. Hey, you're still here. It's great to see you. I know that means you enjoyed this last episode with Abby Olcese, and we talked about Good Friday and the movie Rogue One, a Star Wars story. And here's kind of what continues to stick with me, is that idea of living in the gap, understanding that Jesus died on the cross for our sins and what that must have been like that day if you were a follower of Jesus. Now, I know we already have the hope, the light. We know what happens on Sunday, and that's absolutely amazing, life-changing, history-altering. But since it's Good Friday, I wanted to just sit for a moment and use this as an opportunity to imagine how good Jesus is to us. That he chose to go to the cross so that you and I would not have to suffer death the same way that he did. Yes, we will die, but we die with hope, knowing that we have a future with God in heaven. So let's just ponder that today. Not a lot of action, but what I want is us just to sit and realize and understand and appreciate what Jesus did on the cross and what that means for us in death, what that means for us and eternal life. All right, everybody. So live faith first.